Hey everyone, thanks for attending this webinar. It is titled How to Ensure a Flawless Tenant Move In and Move Out. And I'm Lucas Hall. I operate a website called landlordology.com, and it's all about landlording. And so I am so excited to be here. And what we're going to do is go through some general rules real quick, and then give some more people some time to get on. I do see that a lot of people are already here, and that's awesome. I'm super pumped to spend the evening with you guys. I see some old friends that I've met through the website, Gail and a few other people. David, it's really great to have you, and Steve. Um, if anybody has any questions during this presentation, there's a little questions box to the right of your screen. It's the GoToWebinar control panel, and you can just type that in there. I will not be answering questions during the presentation, but what it'll do is accumulate, and then we will address them at the end. And so if you get it in earlier, I'll look at those first. This webinar is also being recorded, so I will post it, assuming assuming that the technology works right. I've had a couple times where it flaps out on me, but assuming it's there, I'll post it later, and you guys can go back and look at that, as well as I'll post it to SlideShare, which is like PowerPoint but online. And any links that are in the presentation, you'll be able to go back and click on those and review it. So again, so excited to be here. Let's get started. I want to try to keep it as close to an hour as possible so that I don't interrupt anything else that you might have planned tonight. First, who am I? Why am I qualified? I am Lucas Hall. I'm a project management professional, and that just is a funny way to say that I handle projects, that I can get things done. I'm also a landlord of approximately 10 years. I have 4 properties and 17 tenants, and that fluctuates a bit depending on if I'm buying or selling at the moment. And I founded Landlordology, which is just an incredible site for landlords. It's all free. But since then, Landlordology has become part of Cozy, and I am the chief landlordologist and community manager at Cozy, which provides software for landlords. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. And we're not, with this presentation, we're not trying to claim that we or I give legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but I am an experienced landlord, and I just like helping people. So that's what this is for. I'm here to teach you best practices and how to, in this case, how to handle tenant turnover and that space between tenants. So please, if you have a legal issue and you want legal advice, please consult a local attorney. Landlordology is that site I mentioned earlier. That's probably how you found this webinar, but if it isn't, here is the homepage, and you can browse through the homepage, or there's navigation up in the upper right-hand corner, and the URL is there on the bottom. One of our more popular items on Landlordology is the landlord-tenant state laws and regulations. As you can see from the map, what we're doing is we're summarizing these complex state laws, and we are putting them together into like one page, right? Just kind of the bullet points that you need, and it's fantastic. So they're really popular. For example, the California state laws page has almost 1,000 comments of people going back and forth and talking all about it. And I also chime in and try to help out where I can there. For the states that are in gray, don't worry, we'll get to you. But as of now, when you click on those states, it'll actually send you to the official statutes, which is great because you can research it there. It's just not as easy to read the statutes as it is just to read a summarized sheet. So again, check that out. That is definitely one of our more popular things. And then the landlord toolbox, which you can access from the upper right-hand corner. And in that, you have not only the state laws, but you have something called the landlord lifecycle, which is where newbie landlords can go in and learn, like, what does it take to be a landlord? How do I go through this process? What does that look like? And you can just walk through all the steps, as well as maybe tools that might help you in each one of those steps. And so move in, move out is just one of those steps in the landlord lifecycle. Next, we have landlord guides, which are actually premium but free guides, which they're very detailed, and they help you go through a variety of things. A lot of the content that's in here is also in one of our premium guides, which you can download for free using that link. And then Services Directory and Ask Lucas. Services Directory is actually just a list of my favorite tools for landlords. I don't get a kickback, or I don't get an affiliate revenue or anything from these tools, but they're just great things that I think are worthwhile, to check out as a landlord. So I think they'll help you, and I don't get anything out of it other than just, trying to help you. Next is Ask Lucas, and that's just a Q&A podcast that I run. And if you have a question and want to get it answered on the podcast, just leave me a voicemail through the site. And lastly is the landlord software that we offer, which is through Cozy. And Landlordology is owned by Cozy, and it is actually also free. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So with Cozy, you can collect rent online, screen your tenants, and perform credit checks for free. No other service on the planet does this. And to be honest, even if I wasn't affiliated with Cozy, I would still use the product for my own properties because it's just so simple and so easy to get your tenants set up. And you can, not only go from application to tenant screening to, credit check, and then also collect rent, but it kind of walks you through the whole process. And then when they move out, you're all ready to do it again. It's just painfully easy. Or not painfully easy, I guess. But the URL is down there. It's cozy.co. Oops, let's go back. So we're also everywhere. Cozy is used in 1,000, actually probably more now because that's an old number, but 1,000 of the biggest cities in the United States and 1,300 zip codes. It's used all over the place. So a lot of people think that it can be used in Oregon or California or whatever, but it's universal software, and the only requirement is that you have a U.S. bank account so that we can send money to you when your rent comes in. So let's move on to the presentation. I see some new people have joined. Hey, welcome. I'm Lucas Hall, and this is a presentation on how to have a flawless tenant move in and move out. And so we're going to get going with that content. First, I guess I should really call it a flawless move out, move in, because I think that the tenant, in this case Sarah, has to move out before Mark can move in. But that step is often where the majority of lawsuits happen, over the deposit and over damages and over, using last month's rent, whatever. That's where a lot of the conflict happens. So the majority of the time, things are great with your tenant. You're collecting rent, they're paying, they're happy. It's just during that move out process that causes a lot of heartburn. So how to make it as flawless as a diamond. This, believe it or not, is a simplistic view of the move-in, move-out process. There are a lot of steps there. We're going to go through all of them, but I'm going to make it really, really easy. And as you can see on the left-hand side of that dotted line are steps that apply to an outgoing resident who is moving out. And then on the right-hand side is the incoming resident or the person who's moving in. So as a landlord, you have to walk through these steps and kind of go back and forth and deal with the old person, then deal with the new person, and make sure that everything works and coordinates at the same time. And that's what I'm going to show you. So first, before anything happens in this process, you first have to talk to your outgoing resident, the person whose lease is ending. You have to ask them, what's going on? Are you going to stay or are you going to move out? And so what I do in my leases is that I require, I actually say this in the lease, I require a 60-day notice of non-renewal on fixed term leases. So a lot of times, and actually in every state, there is no requirement, no state statute requirement that says that you have to give notice of leaving a fixed term lease because it's a fixed term. It just expires. That's just what it does. That's how it's built. So when it expires, if you don't do anything else, the default is it just terminates and the person has to leave. However, you can change that. You can put a new clause in your lease and you can say, the statutes are mute on this. It doesn't say anything. So I'm going to require that you give me 60 days that you're not going to renew. So the assumption is it is going to renew, but we still have to figure out, a new rent increase or sign a new lease. But what this does is it helps you figure out 60 days in advance whether or not you're going to have to find a new tenant. And that 60 days is critical. As you can see, the process is quite long. If you want the person to stay, I recommend you consider not raising the rent. I've talked to lots of landlords who say, I always raise the rent. It's my hard and fast rule. And I'm like, well, what if you have an amazing tenant who it treats your place incredibly well and you don't want them to leave? So, I'm not going to lose any money. I mean, they're like, oh, well, you're going to lose $50 a month that you could get. Well, no, not really, because I'm going to give that tenant a credit, or I'm going to give him a break, and I'm not going to raise the rent, and he's going to maintain my property well, and that has some value. But even so, when he does leave, and he or she will eventually leave my property, uh, they rarely ever stay past 3 years. I think I don't think I've ever had anybody longer than 3 years. Um, then I'll just make it up on the next person. So I'll raise it even more at that point, and it'll be a clean transition, and the new tenant won't even know what the old tenant paid, and it'll be fine. I'll make up the difference then. But in the meantime, I'd love to keep a great tenant. Number 3, provide instructions if they do leave. Provide instructions on how to vacate and what to do, and provide them with a cleaning list. I used to not do that cleaning list. I didn't really think about it much until I kept coming to this one property that I have that caters to mainly caters to group people who want to live in a group, and they're typically under the age of 25. And I kept coming in, and it was so dirty, so dirty, even though they cleaned. And I realized they did spend a day cleaning. They just had no idea how to clean. And so provide them with those instructions on what those expectations are. And it can be a simple checklist, or it can be, in one case, one of my properties it's a pretty big property. And so I have a 6-page list that I say, this is what you have to do in every single room. And I go through it. And they'll gripe in the beginning, but at the end, I'm like, if you do this, you'll get your deposit back. And they like that. They like that certainty. Next, after you figure out that the tenant is leaving, you need to go find a new tenant. So this is where you start the whole listings process, right? So you start posting listings on various sites, and then you want to try to host showings, try to get people interested and host showings 4 to 6 weeks out from the end of the lease. Why 4 to 6 weeks? To be honest, I have no idea. but I will say that 4 to 6 week window seems to be magical. So for whatever reason, time and time again, every single year on all my properties, that's when I catch people who are looking to move in on the date that I want them to move in. So I guess it kind of makes sense, right? Like somebody's at a place and then they have to give 30 days notice, or sometimes 60 days notice. And so they start looking for a new place at 30 to 45 to 60 days out. So that's where the 4 to 6 weeks come from. And they're interested and they're willing to do that date. If I wait too long and I'm looking at 3 weeks out, then I've already missed that group of people, and the people I'm dealing with are the people who are getting evicted, or they're getting terminated, or they need to find something quick. And it's like, well, I'm getting the bottom of the barrel at that point. So anyway, 4 to 6 weeks out is when you want to shoot to have people showing up at your house. Next, I still go to Craigslist and Postlets. If you're not familiar with Postlets, it's postlets.com, and that is a fantastic little syndication site. So regardless of how you collect rent or what tool you're using, whether it's just cash checks or software to collect your rent, you can post anywhere. And Craigslist is just a beast, and it has tons of traffic, so that's always a great asset. And I still probably get about 85 to 90% of my referrals from Craigslist. But Postlets, what it does is it syndicates your ad, and it's a pretty little ad. It syndicates it to all the major sites like Zillow and Trulia and HotPads and a bunch of other ones, just to get it out there. So between those two sites, I'm hitting everything on the internet, and it really pushes your property out there for everyone to see. So I don't waste my time on posting on 12 different sites. I just post on those two. Next, you want to have lots of pretty pictures, and you want to go for the ooh pretty effect. And what I mean by that is when someone's trolling through 100 new listings in the last 15 minutes on Craigslist, and they're clicking through, they literally only spend maybe 2 or 3 seconds on each listing. And if you have pretty pictures, that's going to catch our attention. They're going to look at it and say, "Oh, pretty," and then they're going to read the rest of the stuff that you have to say. So pictures are so critical. One great little website that I like is called Circle Pics, and that's a company that will come out and take pictures of your property and then give you a site to host them on, and they actually do a very good job. So again, just something I've used in the past. Next, if you do have a lot of interest, try to host something called the Landlord's Open House. And for those of you who have attended other webinars in the past, I've mentioned this before because it just works. So a Landlord's Open House is basically where on Monday of the week, you post an ad, and then in that ad you say, I'm going to have appointment only showings on Saturday And so, email me and we'll set up a time. And what you can do is, as those requests start coming in, you set those appointments up every half an hour within like a 4-hour window, right? Or 3-hour window, and say, set them up at 1, 1:30, 2, 2:30, 3, and then back them, back to back on each other. And you can tell your current tenants that are living at the property, say, hey, listen, you don't have to stay, but I'd love it if you could just scram for a while and go get dinner, go get an early dinner or a late lunch, or go catch a movie or something, and just vacate the property for 4 hours. And I'm going to walk new people through it. And if with any luck, I won't ever have to come back, because I'm going to find somebody today to rent it when your lease is over. And by doing that, it's respectful of the current tenants that are there. And then it also creates a little bit of competition between all the people who show up, right? Because even though they do have appointments, they tend to be sometimes a little late or a little early, and then they kind of pass each other as they're coming in and out of the front door. And it creates the sense that, like, ooh, other people are interested and I want to be interested too. And so instantly, you have the popular house. So I like to do that. And that's worked out really well for me. One time I did have over 40 people show up within 3 hours. They were large groups of people trying to rent this big house. But I think it was still 7 or 8 groups. And I had 3, this was before I was collecting online rent collection. But basically I had 3 rent deposit checks that day. I didn't know who was going to pan out or if a check was going to bounce. So I collected 3, and I just said, I'm going to, go through them and, offer it to the candidates who put in their applications first. But, if you want to hold it, give me a deposit check. And they did. So it worked out well. All right. So after you show the property and you find a group of people that are interested, you have to have them fill out applications. It's a very basic part of landlording, and I'm sure everyone already does it. I don't know how you would be a landlord otherwise, but the neat thing lately, probably in the last 5 years, I should say, is that online applications are so great. So they're now actually really secure, and tools like Cozy lets you do it to where the tenant actually doesn't have to provide any sensitive information other than maybe where they work or referrals from previous landlords and date of birth and all that. But they don't have to give their social security number, which for a lot of people it's like, ooh, that's a red flag, but not really if you can get the credit report also with it. So I'll go through that in a minute. But also, not only should you use online applications because it's super easy and super efficient, excuse me, but you should collect those applications from all adults. And so this is where I often hear landlords say, I have, a family, and only the wife works and the husband stays at home, and I'm only gonna really review the wife's application because she's the only one with a salary. Excuse me. Well, that's okay, but what happens when they get divorced or they split up or they just cause issues, or the husband goes rogue? You just don't know. So anyone who's over the age of 18, you need to collect an application from. So not only do you have their information, but they've been approved to live there. They are responsible for their actions. 3, it is recommended that you accept the first qualified applicant or applicants. It is recommended, but it is not law. And so there is a nasty little rumor out there that I hear from time to time that basically says you have to accept it in the order that they've applied. And actually, for those of you who are in California, I know that there are a lot of attendees from California. Inside the California Landlord Tenant Handbook, which is issued, which is not statute, but it is issued by a government agency, it does say that you should accept it in the first, accept it in that order, the first qualified applicant. But they didn't actually cite the statute. And so I actually called their office and I said, hey, what's going on with this? Where's the reference? Where's the citing? Because you cite everything else you say, but you conveniently didn't do that one. And they said, oh, hold on, please. And next thing you know, their office attorney's on the phone with me. And I asked him the same question. He just politely said, it's not statute, but we think it's a good idea. So we we put it in there. And I thought, okay, sure. So anyway, even from California, it's not law, but it is recommended. And I think it's a good idea. That's not to say if you have 2 applicants who submitted applications, within a minute of each other, and one of them is superior, a far superior tenant, but they're both qualified. As long as one of them doesn't fit into a class that's a discrimination class, you just have to weigh that risk versus reward, and decide what's best for your business. So, moving on. After you collect applications from all adults, you need to review and approve them and offer that to somebody. So, what do you look for, right? This is a crash course in tenant screening. There are a lot of things that you should look for in tenant screening, and I wrote a whole guide on it. And so if you go to the landlord guides on Landlordology, you'll see that. But the most important thing is, are they able and willing to pay rent? They may make $2 million a year at their job, but if they're kind of cocky and they don't have a desire to pay rent, or they just have a chip on their shoulder, then you're not going to get rent from them. It doesn't matter how much they make. So they have to have a respectful attitude towards you and a willingness to make this work. So the way that you can tell is you call their former landlords. I think the greatest predictor of the future is actually the past. So see how they performed at the last 2 places at least. And the reason I say call the last 2 landlords is the current landlord still has them as a tenant, so they're not going to know how they treated the place when they moved out, or if they skipped out on the last month, or if they burned a hole in the side of the carpet. They just won't know that stuff. So you call the last 2 landlords and ask them a bunch of stuff, whatever you want, about bills and utilities, and if they'll tell you, great. If not, move on. But would you rent to them again? I like that because it's an open-ended, could be yes or no, but what I like to hear from them is, at the end of the day, this tenant is still worth it, because that goes a long way. It's like, sure, maybe they broke a window, but they were really apologetic about it and they fixed everything. Do not discriminate. Now, what does that mean? So I call these the Federal 7, and according to the Fair Housing Act, there are 7 primary classes that are protected. So those classes are race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disabilities. So if a tenant fits into one of those categories and you are unfairly choosing somebody else, then you should expect to have a discrimination lawsuit on your hands, because that's illegal. Now, each state adds on to that, and they're all different. And I'm going to reference California because I saw the member list, or the attendee list before this presentation, and I saw that a lot of people are from California. So I focus on this. And one of the things that I like about California is that they do try to pave the way for fair housing. And everything that they do, though some people think it's extreme, I think it is a good best practice. So what I mentioned earlier about accepting applicants in order, it's not law, but it's a best practice. It's a good idea. So anyway, in the case of California, you also can't discriminate against sexual orientation, marital status, ancestry, source of income, or citizenship. Now, citizenship is a big deal because in a lot of states there are people who are not citizens, and it's hard to pull a credit report on that. But in California, you can't discriminate. But you could reject them based on not having any credit, or documented income if that's the case. But source of income, let's say you can't discriminate upon that. Let's say if they're a trust fund baby and they have $2 million in the bank, but they don't have a job, it's like, well, maybe they're getting a paycheck from that trust fund every single month. It doesn't matter that they don't have a job because they're still making more than you, So you have to look at that big deal, or that big picture, I should say. But also in a lot of areas, I know a lot of landlords who participate in Section 8 housing. That is considered a source of income. It may not be their job, but they are getting money from the public assistance, and so that is a source. So you can't discriminate against that. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to participate in the Section 8 housing program, but you can't discriminate against the tenant. Number 5, sex offender is not a protected class. This is also a hot topic that I've come across at almost every conference I've been to and on Landlordology. Surprise, surprise, right? being a sex offender is a choice. In every single place that I've researched, it is not a protected class. And you'll see 2 links on there at the bottom. One of them is a Landlordology article that I wrote because I had enough people telling me that their lawyers said it was a protected class that I went and researched. I found not only federal, state, but also local documents, including a letter from the Attorney General of California that said, it is not a protected class for the purposes of discrimination in housing. Point blank. So go to that article if you're interested or you feel like arguing. You can research all of those sources that I found and see that documentation. But also this the National Sex Offender public website, which is nsopw.gov, is a fantastic resource, and I'm going to show you that real quick. When you're screening somebody, it's pretty easy just to go to this website, nsopw.gov, and type in somebody's name. That's all you need. You can even go to the state sites, and when you do, when you search for it, it'll tell you if they've ever been convicted. And this is a national database, so it's pretty easy. It also can be a little scary because you can look up, your neighborhood. And I don't know if I necessarily want to know who's in my neighborhood right now, but I definitely don't want to deal with tenants. I just don't know if I could live with myself if something happened because I didn't do a good enough job screening. So moving on, the next step is not that. Approval and rejection, right? So you find somebody and they turn out to be great. Although previous landlords say that they're awesome and they're sad that they're leaving, right? But you get them and they are a doctor and they make a ton of money and they've never had issues, right? So what do? You can call them up and congratulate them by phone. I think that's so critical because this is one of the first interactions that you have with them as their landlord or as a potential landlord, right? So be excited for them, congratulate them, say, congratulations, you got the place. I'm so excited to work with you and I'm looking forward to the next year. Because what that'll do is it'll set your whole relationship off to an amazing start, and it will just make things so much easier. If you have to reject them by phone, give them a chance to ask questions, which is often difficult because no one wants to give bad news in person or over the phone. But also send them a written email or a written letter, and that's just so it is written and documented with a date. I think that's critical. But you can often mitigate a lot of issues just by calling somebody up and giving them bad news in person because that's respectful. If you rejected somebody based on credit, meaning they didn't have any credit, they had bad credit, or there was something on the report that made you say you don't qualify, then that person is allowed to have a copy of that credit report for free. Assuming they probably paid for it in the first place, but they are allowed to have that. And so a lot of landlords just say, well, you can contact, Experian or TransUnion or whoever and get it for free. And yeah, they probably could, and Experian will handle that. But I feel like if you're rejecting somebody, just send them a copy of it. It's not hard. It's theirs anyway. So if you use tools like Cozy, that credit report is automatically given to the tenant anyway. So you don't even have to worry about it whether you accept them or deny them. But if you don't use tools like Cozy, then you have to do it yourself. After you've offered it to them and they've accepted, the next step is to get that security deposit as fast as possible. What I like to do is collect that deposit before or at the lease signings. The reason being, particularly before, is because until that lease is signed, they have no legal obligation to continue. They really don't. They haven't signed anything. They've just expressed a verbal interest and they are, interested, but they could back out. But if they give a deposit, in the beginning, then that will actually kind of hold their spot, right? I call it a holding deposit. And with a holding deposit, with any holding deposit, you lose it if you back out. So I like to say, listen, this deposit is to take the place off the market. If you don't want me to rent it to somebody else, then you need to give me the deposit, and that will just roll over after we sign the lease to become your security deposit, which will hold until the end of the, end of the lease. Now, the good news is that they plan on giving a deposit anyway. So if they really are interested, then they shouldn't have a problem with it. If you take the deposit, make sure that you document the exact amount in the lease and maybe even initial it. as to when it was received, or give them a receipt to just make sure everything is documented really well. As I mentioned earlier, holding deposit first, then a damage deposit, and you just do it in that order. If you don't want to take a holding deposit, that's fine, but I promise you will have a lot of tenants back out because they found something better at the last minute and you've already stopped trying to find a new tenant. With the deposit, the state laws vary. They actually vary quite a bit, but oftentimes there is a maximum 1 or 2 months worth of rent, or it's unspecified. So generally speaking, I think the average, what most people do, is that they take only 1 month worth of rent as a deposit. And that's fine. That's usually enough. And the idea is that if they bail on paying rent, then you've at least got 1 month's worth of rent to pay that off. But in the end, I hope that never happens and you just have to, give back the whole thing because they didn't do any damage. Lastly, do not commingle funds, especially if you're an independent landlord with 1, maybe 2 properties and it's, maybe an in-law suite or a basement or something. Just don't do it. Just don't mingle it. So many states say don't do this by law. And the way that you don't do this is that you go get a free checking account or interest-bearing money market account or something that's free, and you immediately put the deposit into that account and you just let it sit there. You don't touch it. You don't do anything with it. Let it sit there until the end of the lease, and then you can go get it and give it back or withhold money from it or whatever. But the beauty is that if you don't put any other money in that account or don't touch it, right, there's nothing else in there except for that security deposit, then you can't be accused of commingling it. And if that account accrues interest, all of that interest then belongs to that tenant, or at least it does in a lot of states. And it's very easy to know what that interest is because that's all of that money's theirs. If you commingle, like how in the world could you possibly know? And then if you commingle, like often I hear from landlords saying that they can't get back the deposit because they don't have it anymore. And it's like, well, what do you mean you don't have it? That money is actually the tenant's. It always was. It always is. And if you go and you spend it on your Tahiti vacation, then you can expect to land in small claims court over it. Again, there's a link there to how to properly handle security deposits. Go check that out later. So you've collected a deposit. The tenant seems great. They're super excited to be here. Now you have to get them to sign a lease. For those of you who are using free lease templates that you found online, please stop. Those things are riddled with generalities that do not apply to your state. So make sure that, if you're going to spend any money during this whole process, go get yourself a really good lease. You can find premium lease sites. I list a bunch of them on Landlordology under the services directory. There's a bunch of really great ones that I recommend. You can go get one specific to your state. And if you don't want to get one online, I know, any landlord tenant lawyer in your city is going to have a copy that you can purchase from them probably for less than $100. You can get them online for, $30 to $50. And they'll be specific to your state, and they're going to be strong and rock solid. That's really what you need. You need something that's fair, but also, impenetrable. 2, as I mentioned earlier, every adult signs a lease, or I mentioned that every adult should have an application, but then you take every adult and you make them sign the lease also, because leases typically have joint and several liability. And what that is like the Three Musketeers, right? All for one and one for all. So with joint and several liability, if a couple gets divorced, they're both still responsible for rent. Just because, somebody moved, to Mexico or Canada, it doesn't mean they're off the hook. It doesn't mean that, or it doesn't mean that the person who's still in the property has to only pay half of the rent because half of their party left, and it comes into play a lot when you have group houses. I have a couple actually where there's younger tenants and they just kind of like living together and they're right out of college, and they often think, well, hey, there's 5 of us. If one of us leaves, we only have to pay 4/5 of the rent, and they just don't get it. But this clause is the legally binding provision that makes that possible. If you are out of state and you're from your property and you need to sign a lease, or if you just want to make it convenient, you can use digitally signing or digital signature tools or e-signature tools and digitally sign those leases. My favorite ones are HelloSign, Sign Now, and DocuSign. HelloSign has, I think, the best price point. They actually give you 3 signatures a month for free, and it integrates with Google Docs, which is fantastic. But Sign Now is also awesome, and then DocuSign is like the Cadillac of signature tools, but it's also pretty expensive. And the eSign Act of 2000 is what makes electronic signature tools legally binding. So it has just as much legal weight as a handwritten signature. So don't let anybody fool you. They're just the same. Lastly, I think with leases, it's so critical to identify how and when you're going to collect rent and what are acceptable forms of payment. And what I actually do is I actually tell them you have to use, in my case, I tell them you have to use Cozy. It's online and it's going to be automatic. And so set it up, connect your bank account, and then the money will just come out on the rent due date without you having to think about it. And what I love about this is that since I started collecting rent online about 5 or 6 years ago now, I have never had a late payment. I know that's mind blowing, but it just doesn't happen anymore because I find quality tenants who are responsible, and then I make them make it automatic, and so they don't even think about it. They set it up once and don't ever log in for the rest of the year, and they love it. They absolutely love it. Anyway, and it's helped me because I haven't had to deal with late payments. Number 5, provide a copy of the lease to the tenants. This seems obvious, but you would be amazed at how many tenants email me on Landlordology and say, I never got a copy of my lease 6 months ago, and now I don't know what it says, and they won't give me a copy. And it's like, well, that is just painfully stupid. But in a lot of states, including California, you are required to give, by law, you're required to give your tenants a copy of the lease within 15 days, if not sooner, of when you sign it. So just, make it online, or if you use one of those electronic lease e-signature tools, then it will automatically send them a copy of the signed ratified document, which is a nice little sweet tool. Next, after you've signed a lease, you have to go back and you have to actually tell the outgoing resident, it's like, okay, and now have somebody moving in on the 1st. You really do have to be out on the 31st or sooner, whenever your lease is up. So I'm going to reference a lot of California state laws, or at least the statutes, because, again, I saw that there are a lot of California people here, but they do a great job of setting a great standard. So number 1, I always think it's great to provide an initial inspection, especially if the tenant requests it. And what that is it's not the move-out inspection. It's the move-out inspection that happens before the move-out inspection. And it can be as simple as going over to the property, with proper notice and saying, hey, listen, if you want, I can just walk around and tell you what you need to fix in order to have a better chance at getting your security deposit back. And they usually appreciate that. They've been living there for a while. Their eyes are kind of blind to some of the stains on the carpet or the holes in the wall. And you just say, hey, listen, you should get that carpet shampooed before you leave because that's an issue. And they will. They respect that. They want a chance to fix things. So I usually try to give 48 hours of that initial inspection notice, but I don't do it any sooner than 2 weeks prior to the end of the lease. So I don't want to tell them, like, hey, the walls are fine, and then then they punch a hole in it, right? Because then they can come back and say, you said this or whatever. It just creates issues. So I try to do it as close to the end as possible. If they leave a bunch of stuff in the property, which happens quite a bit, do not just throw it away. A lot of landlords think, oh, it's trash, I'll just throw it away. Yeah, I mean, if it's really trash, if it's clearly like food wrappers and stuff like that, just throw it away because that's disgusting. But if it's things like DVD players or anything that has any value whatsoever, or if you just want to be safe, just set it aside. In almost every state, you're allowed to move it. First, you should give notice to the tenant and tell them that they need to come pick this stuff up. And then after X number of days, depending on your state, you can then move it to another location, whether that's a storage unit on your facility or on your house or in the basement or something, or a professional paid for storage unit offsite. And typically typically the tenant has to then pay that storage facility in order to get their stuff back. And if they don't, then their stuff gets auctioned off like on the TV shows that we see. Number 4, final move-out inspection should happen within 24 hours after move-out, but not before, or I'm sorry, not before they turn in the keys. So, meaning, yeah, if they've moved out and they've turned in the keys, then fantastic. Then you can do a move out inspection because there's no way for them to get back in and damage the property after the inspection. However, if they move out and they still have, let's say, a month left on the lease and they're willing to pay that rent, but they want to keep a copy of a key just in case they want to go back, then don't do a move out inspection yet because they technically haven't moved out. They plan on returning and they could damage it after you've done that. So anyway, just make sure you get a copy of the keys first before you do any sort of move out inspection. Now they've moved out and you have to get the place ready before the next person moves in. Cleaning and repairs. This is a neat little trick that I didn't learn until probably about 5 years into landlording, and I actually now specify move in and move out times in my lease. Okay, well, what does that mean, right? So what's the big deal? Well, let's say a tenant is moving out on the 31st. That's the end of their lease, and they're staying there until the very end. Well, in my lease it says that they have to be out by 10 a.m. on the 31st. That's an actual move out time. That's a lease requirement. So they do. And I politely remind them weeks beforehand about that 10 a.m. deadline. And they usually respect it. So they move out usually the whole night before because they don't want to get up early and move. And what that does is because they're there for part of the day, they have to pay for the whole day. It's not a hotel. They don't get to pay, or they don't get to rent it by the hour. They have to pay for the whole day. So the next tenants who are moving in, they get to move in at 2 p.m. on the 1st. So, if I really want to have every single day paid for and not have a single ounce of vacancy, then I use these move out times. So let's say a tenant's moving in at 2 p.m. I give them keys on 2 p.m. at 2 p.m. or they come and get them from me or whatever. But what that does is it lets me have 28 hours where I can do whatever I want with that property and clean it up before the new people move in. So from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., 28 hours, I can get a whole lot done, especially if I have a list of things that I know I need to do. I can get contractors in there. I can replace all the carpet in the house. I can even paint most of the rooms in 28 hours. Well, I mean, I can't, but people can. Contractors that I hire can. So that's a great way to have zero vacancy, but still have plenty of time to do it. Like I said, line up your contractors before the lease in. If you know that somebody's moving out at 10 a.m., have those painters there at 11 o'clock. If you can't be there, if you can't participate in this move out transition, then you can use a lockbox. I only use lockboxes though for trusted contractors. Be sure that the old tenant is out and the new tenant is in or hasn't moved in yet. Make sure that place is vacant before you let a contractor in unsupervised, because I'd hate for anything to happen to a resident that's living there. But if there are handymen that you trust and the tenant's okay with it, they can go in and enter with proper notice using a lockbox. Never, ever, 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 ever give that lockbox combination to your tenants because they will use it for their friends or they'll give a copy of the key to anybody that they think is worthy and then they won't ever replace it or they'll get locked out, and they'll go grab it and then leave it in the house and it's not there for you to use. So don't tell them that combination. Lastly, keep copies of the receipts and estimates that you get from all contractors or anybody that's doing cleaning and repairs on the property. You'll need them later when you have to withhold deposit money from it. And like I said, it's best if you're there to handle this and manage that, but time is money. Work hard and work fast, and you can accomplish a lot in 28 hours. Some people want more time, so they schedule 3 days or so, or 4 days or a week to get things done. But I like my rent money, and I love having zero vacancy. So I've been doing this for years, and it's fantastic. Now the new tenant's out. You clean the place. It looks fantastic. If you have an opportunity, take some more pictures right at that moment while no one's living there and it looks great. And now you need to handle with the new tenant, you need to make sure that they turn in their first month's rent. So let's talk about that. What is prepaid rent? It's basically anything that they pay in advance that counts towards rent. So the security deposit is not prepaid rent, it's prepaid funds, but it's different. In California, according to the handbook, you're only allowed maximum 1 month's prepaid rent, and it has to be first month's rent. This isn't true in all states. Some states do allow you to collect last month's rent, which we'll talk here. Number 2, last month's rent, I honestly think is not worth the trouble because there are certain rules depending on the state of you have to collect interest on it. You have to keep it in a separate account. It's not your money yet because you haven't gotten to the last month. And so it's still the tenant's last month's rent. So anyway, I just think it's not worth the trouble. For people who say they want to collect last month's rent, it's usually because they want extra security, right? They want to make sure that that tenant isn't going to bail on them on the last month and just skip out. Well, sure, I get that. But if that's really your concern, then just take an additional deposit. Just say, hey, listen, the deposit is 2 months rent. And most states will allow that. Most states do, actually, up to about 2 months. If a tenant fights back and says, oh, that's crazy, that's too much, then just say, okay, well, then I'm just requiring last month's rent. And it's the same thing, right? Just allocate a little bit differently with different rules. Next, you have to pass out keys. They haven't moved in yet, but you have to make sure that they can. So never, ever, 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 ever give out a key earlier than day 1 or that start time that we mentioned of the lease. This is just common sense, I think, but my sister-in-law is actually a fantastic property manager, but she was in a really tight situation where she was stressed out and had a lot on her plate. And this one guy who seemed like an awesome tenant, and she screened him as best as she could, right? But not well enough, right? But she screened him, and she was going out of town, so she gave him a key 2 days early. And he moved in 2 days early. And then by the time he moved in, she went to cash the check and it bounced. Okay, well, she went and got another check from him. And guess what? 4 checks later, they bounced, all of them, right? And he actually wrote them for 4 separate accounts. He was a total scammer. And he used that to his advantage. And he stayed in that property for almost 29 days, I believe, not paying a single penny. And then she finally took him to eviction court, was in court, and she got a text message 10 minutes before her court time that said, "You'll never see me, sucker," right? So he up and left and knew how to play the system and just disappeared and never showed up at court, never did anything. And then when she left the courthouse and went back to the apartment, she found that he had stuffed a bunch of pillows in the washer and dryer and then turned them on, or at least in the washer, and it overflowed the washer and ruined the hardwood floors in the whole floor. And she had to tell, she's a property manager, she had to tell the owner what happened. The owner was involved, but this happened on her watch. So don't ever do it. That's a hard lesson learned. Charge for early move-ins. I'd say probably about 50% of the time I have tenants who say, hey, listen, I know I'm moving in, my lease starts on the 1st, but I have to be out of my place on the 31st at 10 o'clock because someone's taking my advice. And can I move in early? It's like, well, no, I'm sorry, that's when the lease starts. But if the property is available and it's ready to go, then there's no harm in doing it. However, you should charge for it. Don't let them have it for free, right? Unless you're really in a generous mood. But you can charge them for that one day. Just prorate the one day, and they'll gladly pay it to move in early. Document the number of keys. Again, very simple. But once you give those keys over, and if you didn't write anything down, it's so easy for them to say, hey, listen, you only gave me 3 keys. And you're like, no, I really gave you 4. They're like, no, you didn't, and you can't prove it, right? Well, now you're pretty sure they had 4 keys and they lost 1, but you can't prove it. And worse, now you have to change the locks because now there's a key floating around out there. Granted, you should change the locks anyway, but for those who don't, now you have to. Otherwise, it's a liability. And if you documented the number of keys, then you could charge them to change the locks at their expense because they didn't turn in all the keys. Number 4, prohibit copies in the lease, and that's copies of keys. If oftentimes they will make copies without asking you, and they're just simple keys, so they can take it to any hardware store. But if you prohibit that in the lease, then if you find out that they turned in, or, they have copies, and you gave them 4 and they gave you 6 back, then you can change the locks on their dime because they didn't follow the lease, and now it's a liability because you really don't know if they only made 6 keys or 12, and there's 6 floating around out there. Now that they have their keys and they're ready to move in, it's time to go through that. Number one, allow your tenants to document the condition and perform the move-out inspection. I believe that you should be there with them if you can. However, you need to give them a voice. I think it's critical that your tenants have a voice in the condition of the place. So you should know what it looks like because you just spent the last 28 hours getting it ready. But, and hopefully you have pictures to prove it. But if you don't give them a voice, then how can you actually say that they signed off on it, right? So many landlords I talk to say, oh, I would never let them touch the move out inspection because they're just going to write a bunch of lies. And it's like, well, that's why you do a quality check. And to be honest, I do this all the time, and I've never had people lie about it. Sure, they've exaggerated some, and if they say something's broken and I'm pretty sure it's not, either that one, they don't know how to work it, or two, I just need to call them and clarify. So, for example, I had one tenant say that there were water stains in the drywall and the ceiling. And I, was so confused, and I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't notice anything. And went over because water is a big deal, right? So I went over to see if a pipe was leaking, and sure enough, it was just a popped nail. And for everyone who knows that drywall, anything built in the 70s and 80s probably used nails to hold drywall up, and those nails pop and they just create little bumps. But she thought it was water damage, and she just didn't know any better. When they move in, here is a perfect opportunity for you to start off on a great foot. This is the beginning of your lease, and you're going to be with these people for a year, and they're going to keep giving you money. Like, hallelujah, right? So don't be a jerk, make them feel welcome. And the way that I've done that over the years has varied. I used to give Target gift cards or Starbucks gift cards, or sometimes I'd even do a little welcome basket with coffee and wine and, crackers and things like that. And that was nice. They liked it, but I never, ever got a thank you, like a real thank you, until I started giving out toilet paper. I call this my welcome gift with bathroom essentials. And what it entails is it doesn't even have to be a basket. It can just be a pile of stuff on the kitchen countertop. But what it entails is paper towels, one roll of individually wrapped paper towels, one roll of toilet paper, individually wrapped preferably, one shower liner, the clear plastic stuff, not the curtain, but just the liner, and one little tiny bar of hotel size soap. All of these things put together equal about $10. But if you put them in there, they love it. They absolutely love it. And I figured out why, right? Because move-in day is crazy. It's sweaty. It's tiring. Like, they get there and they're just exhausted. All of their stuff is in boxes. They want to take a shower, but they don't realize that, or they didn't realize that unfurnished places typically don't come with shower liners and shower curtains. So, if they try to take a shower, water's going to get everywhere. So this type of thing just helps them on day one more than pizza would, or more than a bottle of wine. And they really appreciate it. So not only is it a great idea, but it also shows them that you are thinking for them, thinking about them, and looking out for them. And then lastly, what I do is I always follow up on the day that they're moving with a phone call. So I give them a few hours to kind of get moving. And then I call them up and say, how's it going? Do you have any questions? Like, could you find the electrical panel? Could you find, did you figure out how to turn on, the TV or whatever? And give them an opportunity to ask questions because they probably do have quite a bit. Guess what? They are moved in. It is day one. They have all their stuff. Granted, they're in boxes, but they're moved in. Hallelujah. It's time to celebrate. I love these guys. And I'm so excited they're coming out with a new movie. For any of you who have kids, I have a little 3-year-old daughter, and she just thinks that she is one of them. So it's time to celebrate. Do a little happy dance with the minions. Now that the tenant is moved in, you can kind of let off of them a bit and just let them kind of get settled, still check in with them, let them get settled, but then go back to the old tenant and say, hey, great job moving out. For the next couple days, I'm going to itemize all your damages and send you a copy of it. What you're allowed to do, and these are all the things that hopefully you documented in the move out inspection that we mentioned earlier, but what you're allowed to deduct out of a security deposit is very specific. And at least in California, I mentioned the reference there, but this is pretty standard across the board in most states. You're allowed to withhold money for unpaid rent, for cleaning to return to the property that a move-in condition, which you know what that is because you have a move-out and move-in inspection sheet that they filled out. For any repair or damages other than normal wear and tear. Now, that there's often a gray line as to what defines normal wear and tear and what doesn't, but generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is if the average person would have caused the same issue, caused the same damage, it's probably normal wear and tear. For example, patting down a carpet or maybe damaging the mini blinds a little bit, things like that. But if there's a carpet strand that's ripped up 10 feet and it runs the whole length of the room, then that's not clearly normal. I don't ever consider any animal damage as normal, even if they're allowed to have pets, because it's always normal wear and tear from a person's perspective. Restoration or replacement of personal property, including keys, beyond normal wear and tear. So if you had a TV in there and that was a furnished item or a couch, and they damage that, you can restore that. You can get the couch cleaned, or you can, buy a new TV if they steal it. You can even make new keys or change the locks if they just, if they lost them or damaged those things. And the last step, congratulations, we're almost there. The last step is the deposit refund. So after you figure out what the deposit withholdings are, you calculate that up, and then you figure, you subtract it. You have to return the deposit within, I'm going to say X days after the tenant vacates. It varies greatly from state to state, but typically, it's anywhere from 15 to 60 days. In California, it's 21 days. And I would hold true to that as a hard and fast date. Do not hold the money any longer than that, even if you're waiting on, repairs or estimates. Do not give the deposit back any earlier than 60 days from the end of a fixed term lease. Meaning, let's say a tenant moves out early. They just move out 90 days beforehand, but they're still going to pay. Or perhaps they say they're going to pay. Never give that money back too early before the lease is over, because they may decide to skip out on that last month, and you may need that deposit to pay for unpaid rent. Future repairs, things that haven't happened yet but are clearly the responsibility of the tenant, you may use a good faith estimate from a contractor as the amount. Now, I think that we all should be, have a moral standing about it. And if a guy who's replacing a chimney because the guy ran into it, the tenant hit it with his car or something, if he's fixing the chimney and it was going to take him 60 days to get on the calendar and then get over there and do it, use the estimate, withhold the money. And then if there's a difference, let's say it comes back more expensive or cheaper or whatever, then you can go settle up with the tenant later. But make sure that you give as best as you can that money back to the tenant within the deadline. Otherwise, tenants are very quick to take landlords to small claims court. And if you don't follow that deadline, then you're going to be not favored by the judge. So while your tenant is now getting settled in, hopefully you've set up online bill payment or online rent collection. And I've mentioned this a couple times. I use Cozy. I work for Cozy, in full disclosure, and Cozy owns Landlordology, but it really is the best tool for independent landlords. And again, it's completely free, like completely free. There is the next question that people always ask me is how do you make money if Cozy is completely free? Well, what we do is if a landlord requests a credit check, then we contact and coordinate that with the tenant, and then the data gets pulled from Experian and the credit report gets produced. That credit report is shared with both people, and that credit report costs $19 or $19.95 to be exact, and the tenant pays for that. So Cozy actually makes enough money off those credit reports that I can give away everything else. So to process rent, it's completely free. There's no monthly minimums. There's no transaction fees. There's no monthly subscription fees, nothing. It really is free. So go check it out. It's cozy.co, so cozy.co. What we do, and I'll tell you a little bit more, one of the most beautiful things about Cozy is that with the online rent collection, it works perfectly with roommates, which is often something that most other systems don't do very well. And so what it does is it maintains that joint and several liability that I mentioned earlier, where let's say Sarah, Jordan, and Mark, who are 3 tenants, they all want to pay their own portion. Maybe it's not an even portion, as you can see in the picture, but they want to pay together. Well, Cozy collects that money all from them, from each one of them separately, lumps the money together, and then sends the landlord one lump sum payment, which, like I mentioned, enforces the joint and several liability idea that they are one entity. So if it ever comes down to a lawsuit, you're going to need that, because you can sue either, all 3 of them or whoever you can find, right? So let's say Jordan doesn't pay a rent, and you don't, you wouldn't get paid at all, because it's not a good idea to take partial payments. That'll hurt you in the long run, legally. So anyway, so joint and several liability is enforced by Cozy. It's the only one that does it. The applications are awesome. They're online, they're easy to understand, and then what the tenant or what the landlord sees is actually what you see here, which is also free. So it connects with their LinkedIn profile, which is kind of neat. So you can actually verify, that they work where they work, that way. I know that's just a connection there, but honestly, if a tenant is posting something on their LinkedIn profile that they work at Google, let's say, then it's probably true, because LinkedIn's very public. I think they would get reprimanded if they didn't. Anyway, credit checks, also free for the landlord. So as I mentioned, it's $19.95 for the tenant. Tenant pays it directly, but the credit reports are awesome. It's formatted to be the prettiest looking credit report I've ever seen, and it makes it really easy and summarizes the data very well, so landlord can just quickly understand what's going on. I know if you're anything like me, I oftentimes have had trouble understanding what a credit report is actually telling me. So this is a great way to not have that issue. Again, it's cozy.co. Definitely check it out. You got nothing to lose. It's completely free. We don't even take your credit card information. So check it out. It'll change the way that you are a landlord for good, and your rent will just come pouring in automatically, and you can go on vacation with your kids, or you can hang out and you don't have to worry about it. Now we've gotten to the question and answer portion of the webinar. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope some of it came through. If you have any questions, go ahead and dump them into that question box to your right, which is the little control panel for GoToWebinar. I'll start to see them, and I have a couple already. Let's check it out. Hey, Terry, it's good to see you again. Thanks for attending. All right. Pardon the silence. I'm just reading the question. Okay, so Joy has 2 questions, it looked like. Joy Barcombe says, if I have to clean or repair items in the house after move out, can I perform the labor and expect reimbursement from tenants? If so, can compensation be comparable to an independent vendor or independent contractor? Hey, Joy, that's an awesome question. Thank you for asking that. That is a common question. What she's basically asking is, can I bill my tenants for my time? So if I fix the kitchen sink, can I bill them the same as what a plumber would? And the answer, sadly, is no. So it doesn't mean that your time isn't valuable or that your time isn't worth something, but to claim that you could charge the same that, as an independent plumber would, it just doesn't have any ground. I think it would get thrown out in court, because you are not a licensed plumber. What might take you, it would take you maybe an hour to fix a clogged drain or something, might take a plumber 10 minutes. So the timing is different. But what I've done in the past, I don't do it anymore. What I did do in the past was I did put a clause in my lease that said my time is worth $20 an hour. If you want to hire me to do any of the things that you were supposed to do, by default or by me saying so, then that's what you're going to get charged. And that was always a point of contention, because again, how did I value $20, right? How did I put it in there, and how did I come up with that number? So I actually took it out of my lease, and I don't do that anymore. I think it's an area where I would get in trouble if I had to go to court over it. But what you can do is, if you are a licensed contractor or licensed, you have a skill set and you actually market your services to other people. For example, I know a landlord who is a master plumber and he has a price sheet. In that case, absolutely. So he does that for a living or skilled at it in some fashion, then sure, yeah, use your normal pricing sheet and you can validate that you're charging them whatever you would charge anybody that you service. So great question. Thank you. The next question from Joy, 2 in a row. Thanks. If tenants do not want to give back, if the tenants do not want to give a deposit to hold the rental property, can I reject them and look for another tenant willing to leave a deposit? And the answer is absolutely. Yeah, that can be a criteria for being accepted. So I often tell the tenants before, as they're filling out applications, I tell them that this is what's going to happen. I'm requiring a security deposit, and then we're going to sign a lease quickly. I actually don't. I try not to be the bad guy there. I just put it on them and give them a choice and give them options. And I say, if you want me to take it off the market, I need a deposit to hold the property for you. If you back out, you will lose it. So it's a nice way to say, put your money where your mouth is. If they aren't willing to do that, then there's a solid chance that they weren't going to show up to the lease signing anyway. All right. Steve, what are the best practices for collecting deposits and first month's rent before move-in day using Cozy? I'm glad you asked. So Cozy is built exactly for independent landlords to accomplish this. What happens is when, let's say you have new tenants and you go through the application process through Cozy and now they've been accepted. The next set of questions in Cozy is, what are those lease dates and what is the lease amount or the rent amount and what are your deposit amounts? And is there any prorated rent? So if there's any sort of, we call them just move-in costs, which encompasses that first month's rent, if you want to take first month's rent, or the prorated rent, let's say they're moving in the middle of the month and it's not going to be a full month, or the security deposit, all of those things can be collected immediately. So as soon as you set things up, let's say you were moving somebody in for January 1st, and you're doing this now, you can set it up through Cozy, give us all those numbers, and we will actually, after the tenant connects his bank account, pull it out immediately and send it right to you. So we don't wait till move-in day. We don't wait, those are all move-in costs and they get issued immediately. Great question. Otherwise, how could you hold the security deposit beforehand if you couldn't collect it beforehand? So if you do that, then as soon as rent is due in the beginning or on the next first of the month, whenever the next payment date is, then Cozy will just start automatically collecting that. Next is Ryan. Does the online application account for multiple tenants or do each need to fill it out separately? If separately, does the site recognize these multiple people are associated with a single application? Yes, that's awesome. That's a great question, Ryan. Thanks. So as I mentioned earlier, every adult applicant needs to fill out their own application, and they would each go to the URL or special link that Cozy gives you, and they would fill it out independently. But there is a section there that says, what are your roommates, right? Do you have any roommates? Do you have any other people in this group? And they can put down the names and the email addresses of those other people. And those names and those email addresses help the system figure out that this application is connected with this application. And then it actually groups them together inside Cozy and displays it in the dashboard for a landlord to see. And the beauty of it, and the feature that I've never seen anywhere else, is that not only does it group all those all those applicants together, but then it summarizes the key data points. So then it says, this group makes $10,000 a month, and it actually goes as far to say what percentage of the rent that is. So, or I should say, the rent is X percentage of their monthly income, which is a critical point. So I don't ever accept anybody whose rent or whose monthly income isn't 2 to 3 times what the rent amount is. But it's kind of hard to figure out, and you have to calculate it independently if you have separate applications. So Cozy figures it out on its own, and it helps group everything together and makes it super simple for the landlord. So the next question is, what should we look for in property managers if I have to rent an out-of-state property? Guys, you guys are really nailing it. These are awesome questions. So I'll start out by saying about 50% of the people that use Cozy, the landlords that use Cozy, are out-of-state landlords. They want to do it themselves because they don't want to pay for a property manager, and they use Cozy, the tools that Cozy provides to do it themselves. Now, granted, Cozy is an online service. you're going to need somebody to be at the property to let people in for showings, and you're going to need somebody there to go handle maintenance requests and all that. So you can do it two ways. You can be like those other cozy landlords and do half of it yourself, and then kind of have points of contact in the city where your property is, whether it's a neighbor or a friend or a handyman that you just trust, and he can handle all that stuff, and you can pay him. Or you could hire a professional property manager to do everything, and what they will charge is typically 1 month's worth of rent plus maybe a finder's fee and maybe some other small fees like rent collection fee and other things. But the problem that I have with property managers is that they're just too darn expensive. They just eat into any sort of profit that I get. And so, I could take that profit and reinvest it and buy more properties or do whatever, but instead I'm paying for a property manager. So I think that a solid, good property manager is worth his or her weight in gold. But I just don't find a lot of them. I find ones that are overburdened and have too many properties to maintain, and they just don't give your house any attention. They only deal with problems rather than be proactive. So what should we look for in property managers? Somebody who's willing to actively go to your house, go to your property at least once a month and check in, who's able to do online rent collection, and hopefully is someone who is not going to charge you more than 1 month's worth of rent. And all that's in the contract. And also, you should make sure that in the contract it says that you can terminate the agreement if you're not satisfied with the service, because you need an exit clause if it doesn't work out. All right, I hope that helps. I do have a couple articles on Landlordology about finding property managers and what you need to look for if you wanted to, or if you should hire them at all. But I believe that you don't have to hire them. I'm kind of like a bankruptcy attorney giving you bankruptcy advice. I'm going to tell you to file bankruptcy because that's what I do, but I'm a do-it-yourself landlord, and I believe that landlords can do it. All right. Hey, Walt, good to hear from you again. Your question is, can a landlord bring any legal action if there is intentional damage from the tenant? For example, your earlier story about your sister and the washer sabotage incident. Absolutely. Yeah, that's just malicious damage. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tenant, in the case of my sister-in-law, the tenant destroyed almost, I think it was $12,000 of exotic Brazilian hardwood floor. And where is he at? Who knows? The tenant just, that's what he did. He was a scammer, and he goes from property to property and doesn't pay a dime. So absolutely, my sister had his social security number, had a lot of stuff, but she went and found out that social security number was fake. It stinks when stuff like that happens. The tenant is responsible. However, catching that tenant is a different story. Unfortunately, in the rent collection business, in the rent debt business, I should say, is that landlords are one of the least successful people at getting on collecting debt. And so I have a friend who works over at Rent Prep, and he's a CEO over there, and he used to be a collector, or at least run a collection business. And he said that landlords have the lowest success rate of anybody in the industry, worse than dentists. So the tenant may owe a bunch of money to replace those floors, but it's hard to collect on it. Sure, you can take them to court and win a judgment, and if you know where they work, you can go get a garnishment on that, or even garnish their tax refund, which are two viable options. But it's difficult. So I always take the approach of do your due diligence up front, screen really well, find quality tenants with great referrals, and people who don't have trouble with income or jobs or whatever, and then you won't ever get to that point. My sister didn't do her due diligence. She didn't research them well enough, and so she kind of got what she deserved, and I guess. Okay, so Terry, if I rent or lease out a government or military employee to a government or military employee, and they are negligent with the property or behind on the rent, can I go to their employer and try to get recourse? If yes, who do I call? Yes, you can. In fact, I actually like renting to military because there is that extra level of assurance. So if you don't, if they aren't behaving properly, like it doesn't even have to be about rent. It can be, maybe they're not treating your property with the respect or the obligations that they were tied to in the lease. Maybe they were destroying things or just not upkeeping it. You can go to their commanding officer and you can say that I'm having trouble with this guy. And part of the military is that they want people to have a solid work-life balance, and they want people to be, people who are in the army or the military, and they want those people to be well off in their personal life too. And so they do actually care, and they will step them aside. And I believe they can actually get penalized in the military for it. So that's the positive side of it. The negative side for landlords is that people who are in the military and have active duty orders also have additional rights. And so they can leave a lease or break a lease with 30 days notice, and they can do other things according to the Service Member Civil Relief Act. So there's pros and cons, but yes, you can actually, there's more assurance there with the military than you would have with somebody who has a private employer. Okay, a couple more questions, guys. I think 2 or 3 more. And thanks for hanging in there with me. I love doing this. So Terry, to follow up on that, in other words, where do I start Office of Personnel in terms of the military? Now, see if you can, hopefully on your rental application, you've collected the name of employer and like a reference to that employer. But, if you know who they work for, let's say they work for the Army base down the street, just show up, like just go there and talk to somebody. Like they want to help you out. They'll figure it out. Can you issue a refund through Cozy? This is Jerry's question. Can you issue a refund? Not currently. No, you got me. That's our fault. You cannot issue a refund, although that is something that we have in the pipeline and are building. Most specifically to issue refunds on deposits, right? I mean, wouldn't it be great if you're collecting all this rent and it's all electronic, and at the end you still have to write out a check? It's like, that stinks, but I get it. And the reason is there's a lot of, I actually don't know any property management software that does that, or at least not in the last year. I haven't researched it recently, but in the last year, I haven't noticed anybody that does that, simply because the rules on ACH transferring money between bank to bank are very strict and very time consuming. And we have one of the slowest bank systems in the world in the United States. And so they're overly regulated by the feds, and it's a mess. So that's part of the reason. But we'll figure it out, and we're going to make that happen so that everyone can finally ditch their checkbook. Okay, all right. I think I have one more question from Damago. Can a tenant withhold rent for repairs? And if so, does that tenant living there for multiple months serve as proof that it's in livable condition? Ooh, that's a touchy one because there's so many factors to this. Oftentimes, a landlord will say, well, I don't need to fix that because you saw the condition of the property when you moved in, so you basically signed off on it or whatever. And then the tenant gets pissed off and then decides to withhold rent to fix whatever it is. I'll sum it up for you. Basically, a landlord is responsible for a habitable home. He is responsible for ensuring habitability. Now, what defines habitability is that you have basic things like hot running water, cold running water, sealed exterior so that you don't have a draft or rain coming through, or holes in the roof, or the basement's not flooded, and the plumbing's working. Like basic things that make a place habitable. It doesn't mean that the landlord has to fix every little nick in the wall or repaint between tenants. It just means that he has to make sure that it's livable. And if it is not livable, then a tenant is well within their right to withhold money from rent to fix it. And many states actually have rules on how to do that. So a tenant has to follow a series of guidelines, like you have to give the landlord 30 days notice, and then if they don't fix it, then you can do it, and then you have to keep track of it all. Sometimes the states actually require a landlord or a tenant to put that money in an escrow, and then the landlord can withdraw it later. It's a hot mess, and it actually gets really complicated in some states. So I would suggest, as a landlord, if a tenant is ever threatening to withhold rent, just fix it. Really, and if it is a big deal, maybe it's a new air conditioner, maybe the air conditioner is only working at 80% efficiency or something, and he wants you to replace it because it's not good enough. That's ridiculous. And if the tenant withholds rent, not correctly, if they wrongfully withhold rent, then consider that as not paying rent in full, and then terminate their lease. Get them out of there. and just say, listen, you didn't have a right to do this, and I'm terminating your lease, and if you don't leave, I'm evicting you through the courts. And then you're going to have a permanent record, or not permanent, but multiple year record of this eviction, and it's going to cause you issues. And then I'm also going to take you to court over the debt. So it's a lose-lose for the tenant. All right. Sorry, one more question. Thanks for hanging in there, guys, and thank you for all of your questions. Can the tenant be given more time after move-in, after the move-in inspection, to point to any issues that he couldn't find during the inspection? You know what? I'm going to say yes, and because this has happened to me, where I give the tenant 3 days to do the move-in inspection, and then turn it into me, and then oftentimes on day 5 they'll be like, "Hey, listen, the toilet isn't quite flushing right." I'm like, "Yeah," or they find a roach or something, like within a week. Clearly, like, they didn't break the toilet, or clearly that roach was probably there when they moved in. So I actually have a provision saying that any kind of pest that they find within the first 2 weeks of them being there, like, I'll pay for the exterminator, but anything after that, I kind of have to assume that they brought it in because the place was clean for 2 weeks. But yeah, I mean, if it's reasonable, and this is where it comes into the fact that you've hopefully been at the property during the transition time, and you've seen the condition, and you've tested it as much as you can. And you're not going to be perfect, but you've tested it, and so you have a general idea, right? If you knew that the front door locked okay, and then on day 5 they're saying that the handle fell off, well, that probably means they hit the door handle with their couch as they moved it in, and they knocked it loose, right? It's pretty obvious. So just handle it case by case, and try to start off on a good foot. And if it's not a big deal, just fix it. That's all the questions we have tonight, guys. Thank you. This was awesome, and I hope you'll join me next time. I've done about 5 of these webinars on various topics, and I'm going to keep doing them because people keep asking for them. So again, hit me up at Landlordology. Also, my email address is lucas@landlordology.com. Feel free to hit me up anytime, and I would love to talk to you about this stuff. It just is just exciting to me. So thanks for all your attendance, and happy landlording, and happy holidays. Thanks.